You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
What's up, my friends? What are we talking about today? The Seattle City Council okays $12 million, 12 big ones, for hotel rooms and tiny homes for unsheltered residents. What we're doing is we're spending some money now. City Seattle Council said, yep, let's spend some money now. Let's hope FEMA pays us back. The Biden administration has said, yep, we're going to do 100% guaranteed repayment on temporary housing. It's what we're doing. Trump administration was 75%, but there's no guarantee the City of Seattle is going to get repaid. That's what we're talking about today. Before we jump on into it, if you're new here, thanks for joining. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, but I read the news that reasonable people want to hear. You're reasonable, right? You're reasonable? Okay. I'm reasonable. Let's do this. Let's jump on in. This is a Como News article. Handy, trusted Como. News for reasonable people, right? The Seattle City Council on Monday approved new funding to house the homeless with the hope that Mayor Jenny Durkan's office will lease 200 hotel rooms and build some tiny homes to provide shelter for the homeless, which they desperately need. With a 9-0 vote, council members unanimously approved $12 million for the project with the anticipation that the city will be reimbursed by FEMA, but there's no guarantee. So you're kind of going out on a limb here, but guess what? City of Seattle, I think everybody's recognizing, you gotta do something. Something's got to happen because the look we've got going on right now, just like the look that Portland has, just like the look that San Francisco has, it's not a good one. And it's a long-term problem because you got homeless people that have posted up everywhere, especially during the Rona, when CDC has said, hey, don't sweep any of the homeless encampments because you might spread the Rona, or you might not. That's kind of what the data says. Based on the data and the science, homeless communities haven't really been impacted by the coronavirus. Weird, right? Strange. There is no 100% guarantee of 100% reimbursement, Council President Lorena Gonzales said, but I think there's an opportunity we can get a reimbursement. Even if it's partial, it's critically important. And I agree, it is important. It's important to get people off the streets, important to get people their own room, get themselves in a situation where they can kind of get their lives going back again. The issue I have is that a lot of people who are homeless, they don't really want to get their lives back in order. And you and I, as the taxpayers, the reasonable taxpayers, we're footing the bill on this one, right? Seattle and King County lawmakers are operating like many they are trying to help, hoping for bursts of federal money here and there to pay for nearly 1,000 hotel rooms and dozens of tiny homes to house the unsheltered. That effort has brought a burn rate of tens of millions of dollars every month. We're literally spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and every big city is, right? Just trying to, the amount it costs to provide services and shelter for one person. It's just incredible. You read the numbers and go, wow, that's a lot of money. Get people inside a private, hygienic place with 4 walls and a door that locks where they can live with dignity and where they can be protected, said City Council member Andrew Lewis, who sponsored the bill. But who's going to pay for it? And is it a long-term solution? Those are the questions that we're asking, right? The $12 million is intended to provide temporary, not permanent solutions, temporary individual housing units for 200 people for the rest of the year. All right, that's good, but that's 9 months, $12 million, 200 people, and we've got what? Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people in King County, I think, alone. The homeless numbers, they're all over the board. I did a podcast yesterday when I talked about 2,800 people living out of their vehicles. That is the size of a lot of smaller towns. And those are people literally in their vehicles, many of which don't run. You'll see it in Soto area of Seattle, south of the Dome, of the old King Dome. They're just parked up and down the streets, and it's like, where am I? This is really weird. I don't feel safe here. Some of the areas, they're clean. They obviously take care of it, and they're literally just trying to eke out an existence on the street in their vehicle that doesn't run. But that's not a long-term solution, and we have zoning laws and ordinances for a reason, because we don't want our streets to literally just be clogged up by vehicles that don't run, that are in disrepair, and many of them just look like they're abandoned. I don't know. There's no good solution. But right now, we're trying to do a temporary one through the end of the year, 12,200,000 people. And that is additive, we're talking to 200 people, that is additive to 300 hotel rooms council provided funding for last fall. It is additive to the 120 additional tiny houses council provided, as well as 125 enhanced shelter spaces, Lewis said. This is a total estimated 725 spaces created during the pandemic that could be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. All right, so FEMA reimburses and we get through the end of the year, then what? Then what do we do? I don't know. Do we have any permanent solutions? I don't know. King County is housing 470 people in hotels, but 225 are at the former Red Lion in Renton, which Seattle also counts in its total because King County and Seattle are splitting the costs on that one. Under President Joe Biden, FEMA has announced homeless housing costs associated with the pandemic are 100% reimbursable. During the Trump presidency, the reimbursed rate was 75%. So Biden's bumped that up. Hey, we're going to cover it. But again, there's no guarantee. There is debate if associated costs like caseworkers and behavioral treatment that's part of the wraparound services offered to unsheltered person are reimbursable. I think they should be, but all of this stuff is just kind of open to debate. As the taxpayer footing the bill, you and I are footing the bill for this bad boy. It seems like we're just borrowing more and more money to go against this stuff, and our streets just get more and more filled with tents. I don't know. That's kind of the way I see it going. That's the way I feel like it's going. So it's like, okay, are we not spending enough money? Are we not creating enough permanent solutions here? We're going after these temporary solutions. I mean, that's kind of what comes to mind when I look at it. I read all these stories and go, okay, but what about long term? What are we doing here? I don't know. That seems to be open for debate, correct? That's why we're talking about it. But it's a gamble city and lawmakers are willing to make because they need to do something. Following advice from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, dorm-style congregate shelters were closed in order to comply with social distancing requirements. Some homeless providers, including Seattle's largest shelter operator, the Downtown Emergency Services Center, has said it doesn't want to go back to congregate shelters after the COVID crisis has passed. Okay, that's fair. But we don't have any real scenario in place. Every now and then, I did a podcast a little while ago. I think a developer who had studio apartments, luxury studio apartments. They weren't really luxury, but they were new, was selling his project, I think for, $70 million? Was it $17 million? I can't remember. It was one of those deals where, okay, yeah, I understand why this developer is trying to sell this entire project. And then it was the city or the county was picking it up to put homeless people in because it was a studio project. And guess what? Nobody wants to buy a studio during the era of the Rona shutdowns because it's a tiny little space that you got to work in. Maybe you're working from home. Even if you have like one pet in a studio, it's kind of a no-go. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to get spaces for all these people, and it's just a mess. And then you go over to Seattle and you're like, okay, we've got all these millions of dollars being spent, and yet the streets are littered with tents. What do we got going on here? What's happening here? It's hard to tell. You can't really tell. So you read these stories and go, okay, that's good. You got 700 and something, call it beds, call it individual spaces. And maybe it's close to 1,000, but we are still woefully short of covering all the people that we have living on the streets. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, people don't want to go into homeless shelters. They just want to live their own life, doing their own thing, which if you kind of follow the Denny Park thing here in Seattle, they did a sweep out. The levels of crime in Denny Park prior to the recent sweep out, it was mind-boggling. It was shocking how many calls came through. And that was a homeless encampment in an urban city park, basically 60, 70 tents. I did a video on that. I walked around that during one of our most horrific rainstorms ever. Didn't really realize that until I was driving away. And I'm like, man, there's water coming up through the storm drain. What's the deal? Because here in Seattle, we don't usually get that kind of rain. But that day, and you can see it on my video, is like, not only am I getting out, no, there's a hypodermic needle and there's just, garbage. Garbage wasn't that big of an issue in Denny Park that day, just a lot of tents. And then 1 month later, maybe 2 months later, City of Seattle had to come through and sweep it out, close it down because the number of complaints and 911 calls, it was just, I read through them and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just a litany of criming going on. So that's why, some people want to say, oh, there's nothing wrong. One of my kids' friends was trying to tell me, I go running through there every day. And I'm like, yeah, but if you didn't run, if you were an adjoining neighbor and you wanted to use that park, maybe you wanted to take little Johnny down there and use the swing set or maybe use the slide, that's not really an option because not only are there hypodermic needles that have been littered throughout that park that residents go down and clean up, but it's just not safe. And you can't do it when you got all this, all the homeless people there. It's kind of frightening. It's kind of scary. I understand they need a place to live. Okay. It's not in our parks and it's not on our streets and it's not on our sidewalks. City leadership has to do something. Here's what they're doing right now. Some temporary units. That's a good start. But again, we're behind and this isn't going to really, it's not really going to make a dent in anything, but it is something that current leadership can kind of point to. Hey, we tried, we did that. And you can see here where Andrew Lewis is talking about, okay, we want some credit. We get some credit for the, 750 units, whatever it is. All right, step in the right direction, but we need probably 10 times that? Something like that. What's the cost on that? I had a news story one of you guys sent me. It was the cost on, per room basis, like $70,000 a year that City of San Francisco is paying for per homeless person. Just mind-boggling. It's like, really? Does it really cost that much? Well, when you get government and then the contractors that government hires, it's like that $5,000 hammer. Do you remember that? Or the $10,000 toilet that was on what was that? It was on a bid, something space station. I can't remember. But it was just like, oh, yeah, this is expensive. And it is expensive. And I think what a lot of us don't realize is that it's not just the physical structure itself. It's all the services that go towards that. And that's part of what this article is saying is, hey, we don't really know about the services. When I was down at CHOP a bunch of times this summer, CHOP/Chaz, it was very evident that services were a big part of the whole homeless community. And so what would happen is that there'd be a dedicated day where services roll in. And it was, when I first started covering this, I'm like, services, what for? Well, they've got basically social workers that come in. They've got people that help out with first aid. You've got, people that bring in food, just all those kind of, and I don't know exactly what the services are, but it was along those lines. People to help out the homeless because they need some help. They, they're living on the streets and they don't have access to the rest of the stuff that you and I are used to. And so you and I pay for that through our taxes, and we just kind of keep this whole game going. And now we're paying for $12 million more, or City of Seattle residents are paying for $12 million more. Need a lot more than that, and kind of need some more permanent solutions for this because, it's an off the rails kind of deal, the whole homeless situation. And I don't have any permanent solutions for it. But there's a lot of areas, a lot of other cities, a lot of other towns where you go through and you're like, how come this area isn't overrun with the homeless population? Why is that? And it's pretty obvious. It's because local leadership doesn't tolerate it. Simple as that. It just, hey, that's not what we do here. That's not our thing. But in Seattle, that's their thing. In Portland, that's their thing. In LA, that's their thing. Venice Beach, it's their thing. New York, New York got cleaned up, and then now it's, kind of flipped back around. And a lot of people want to point to it. Well, you've got a housing affordability issue. Yeah, but that's just the market. You're always going to have that. And so if you are a homeless person and you know that you can't afford to live in a certain city, then your options are limited and you're going to need to go somewhere else where you can get that support. Unfortunately, Seattle on the West Coast, along with Portland, has basically said, well, we're not going to boot you out. So, come on in, live on our streets, live on our sidewalks, do your own thing. We'll come in and we'll clean up. And that was one of the things that, thousands and thousands of tons of garbage are being picked up because the homeless just don't clean up after themselves. Some of them try, and you walk around and you see some of these areas, and even some of the stuff that you see on YouTube, like Venice Beach. Some of the encampments very tidy, very clean. Those tend to be the exception. It's like, there's some folks that are good, there's some folks that are bad, but there's a lot of people in the homeless community that have mental issues, and they just pick up and leave whatever happens, leave their tent. So you see these tents that are just literally just abandoned with a bunch of personal belongings in them, and eventually they get taken away. But, sometimes people squawk and say, that was my home. It was, but you left it on the sidewalk. City workers didn't really know what to do. They do the best they can too. But for a lot of these folks, I don't think they want to go into a hotel room. I don't think they want to go into a tiny room if they're not going to have to live by rules. That's kind of the way I see it. It's just they don't want to. They want to keep doing their own thing the way they want to do it without any regulation. And if you're living in a city like Seattle, you're just going to have to deal with it. This is the look. This is the deal. Going to have to deal with that. I'd rather not deal with that. Makes me uncomfortable. But, I don't have a solution for it either. Hey, do this and this will all get taken care of. I know people throw solutions at me all the time. And they say either, put those people in mental health care facilities if you need to. Well, we don't really even do that anymore, right? That's not really an option. That's viewed as inhumane, except a lot of these people are a danger to themselves and they're a danger to others. And so the cops have to deal with it. There's a big push towards having social workers deal with those people. I don't see that as a real option. Maybe you send out a cop and a social worker, but then how many people do you need, services do you need out there trying to figure these things out? And in the meantime, you send out a bunch of social workers, that is not going to end up well. That's not going to be a good end to the story, is it? We all kind of know how that's going to work. And that's where I think we're heading with a lot of this, is that we have reimagined, we have rethought, we have defunded the police, got police in alarmingly low numbers, especially here in Seattle, because so many of them quit. And how many of them have a foot out the door? A lot. Because we haven't supported our police. I was watching yesterday the shooting in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado. A cop got killed, and they had a big procession to basically honor that cop's memory. Would you see that here in Seattle? I don't think so. We're kind of on the other edge of things. And then we wonder when we call 911 why we've got a long response time, if we have a response at all. What's going on? What's wrong with the police? What's wrong with 911? Well, Interim Chief Adrian Diaz has been saying, yeah, we don't have enough cops on the ground. Basically, the city isn't safe. Good luck with that. We're not probably going to do much follow-up to any crime. We've had a spate of Asian, hate crimes against Asians. Not much is going to happen there, right? I mean, the police just can't all of a sudden, we're got to focus on this when we've got all these other backlogged crimes that basically aren't getting taken care of. So I think you'll see incidents like this, and then people will go, well, why aren't the police doing anything about it? Well, because they've basically only got the resources to handle what they can. And getting back to the homeless issue, homeless people know, all right, we're kind of doing our own thing. City of Seattle and the police, they're not really going to be able to do anything. They're spread thin. We just kind of do our own thing at the time, whatever that may be. So getting a couple hundred hotel rooms, few hundred hotel rooms, Good start, but not a permanent solution. Do I have a permanent solution? No, I don't. That's government's job. I'm a real estate guy that reads the news, right? So, but when I go into Seattle and I look around, I'm like, ugh, that's not good. You guys got to do something because this looks like a hellhole. And it's not all neighborhoods, obviously. It's only a small percentage of neighborhoods. I talk about the Ballard Commons in Ballard. That's a neighborhood. And you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. You've always got, no matter what the town, you've always got that block area, a couple of block area in downtown where you're like, okay, the shelter's over there. You get your food over here. Local mini mart is over here. And then you've just got a bunch of people who live in that area on the streets. And you've got those areas, and those areas here in Seattle have gotten way worse during the pandemic. So we're playing catch up here, trying to spend some city money, hoping that the Fed money comes in. Will it work? Well, it'll get 750 more people off the streets, maybe temporarily. But how many people are coming in per day to city of Seattle right now? A lot. You read the crime stories. Read one yesterday about, it was last week. It was an individual who got arrested twice within about a day period in Portland. And, the second time they were basically like, okay, you don't have any ties to the community. You're just out running around. This is the kid with the big tattoos all over his face. And he was doing some pretty harsh stuff. And if you pulled that kind of crap here in Bellevue, they'd arrest you. They'd throw you in jail, let you cool your heels. But in Portland, they just turn you right back around unless you do it twice in a day. And when the guy showed up for his second arraignment of the day, he was still wearing the orange shoes that he had been issued from the jail whatever it was, 12 hours earlier. So talk about not really having any respect for the law. You got a lot of that stuff going on. And people know that they can get away with just about anything because we're not going to do anything about it. And so in the meantime, more homeless come in, and this is just what's going on. Not a good look. Not a good look at all. I've got an article that kind of shows the divergence between Portland and Seattle. And I'm probably going to do that podcast next. It's really interesting because people always say, well, Sean, why don't you move? Well, this is my home. And plus, the city I live in, Bellevue, I know this is the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, but, Seattle's kind of the big metropolitan area. The city I live in, Bellevue, we don't have these issues. Our leadership takes care of them. Our leadership understands, all right, people don't want to live in the middle of squalor. They don't want to have cars lined up and down the streets that don't run with sketchy people running around. Some of the people are okay. They're fine. All right. But that is more the exception to the rule. Some people are hardworking. Read one yesterday about a guy living in his truck. His truck got repoed. He's working at, what was he working at? One of the big arenas in downtown, one of the stadiums, I think it was. Had a job there, and he's living in his truck, and he's trying to make a go of it, and he's trying to do what he can to eke out an existence. But, the police had told him, hey, you've been on this street, you're violating an ordinance. And that's the case that's in front of the Washington State Supreme Court is whether or not it's okay to tow people's vehicles that have been, on the streets more than 72 hours. And then if you find them, is that cruel and unusual punishment? We kind of go down that road as well. And for people trying to get their lives back together, a big $500-$600 fine, yeah, that's an onerous burden they probably don't need. But unless you have a fine system for leaving your vehicle on the road, are people really going to do anything about it? No, they're probably not going to do anything about it anyway because they don't really have the means to license their vehicle. You go down all those roads and you're like, okay, this is a no-win situation for everybody. But here, at least in this story, okay, we got 750 rooms total. $12 million right now for 200 people. I don't know. Those aren't great numbers. That's a lot of money. And I understand it costs that, but it just seems like this is a never-ending problem and we're not really approaching it the right way. Sean, what's the solution? Don't really have one. Seems like somebody else should be able to figure that out though, right? In the meantime, I'm just going to keep reporting it. We're going to talk about it because it's one of those things where you're like, what's going on there? What is happening? I don't know, but it's a good story, right? We're going to talk about it. Did we used to have these homeless issues and we just never really talked about them? I don't remember this being as big an issue. Like when I was growing up as a kid, if you saw a bum on the street, you're like, oh, there's a bum. Hey, I saw one. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to be harsh and insensitive, but this is many years ago when I was much, much younger, of course. And I said stuff that was off the top of my head, not realizing that was insensitive. But you would go downtown and you'd be like, oh, yeah, there's the homeless. Now they literally line the streets. What changed? Our leadership did. They said, it's okay. We're just going to keep this going. And then we basically ease up on all the criminal law. That's what we're doing. We legalize everything. And then we wonder, how come we've just got such a rough Skid Row? Why is most of downtown looking like Skid Row? Because it is. And as this storyline continues, I will read it for you right here on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for joining in. I will catch up with you guys on the next one. Until then, stay safe. I'll catch up soon. All right. Until then, bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.